Welcome back to the How to Relate podcast. I am here with Cierra Listermann. Hello.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much for coming on. This is great. We got to meet because of Instagram.
Yes.
We had a mutual friend, Kim, who basically said, you two need to meet. And
She hooked us up. That was so nice.
it was so nice. One of my favorite things is connecting friends with friends. So I love it when other people go, hey, you two need to meet, because I like building a web. I think of it as we're all one giant web and we're all 6 degrees of Kevin Bacon. And how close can we all get to those 6 degrees?
I totally agree for sure. Yeah, I love when kind of my friends have their own friends that are already vetted, where I'm like, yep, like I have no problem meeting this person because I know that we're going to have a great connection. So thank you, Kim. Shout out to Kim.
That's Kim. Thank you. So you are also a therapist.
Yes.
Okay. And you are in Kentucky now.
Yes, I live in Kentucky now, but I do have a virtual private practice for North Carolina residents. So I can treat anybody that's living in North Carolina. I lived there for quite a while, got licensed there, and then moved. So luckily with, telehealth and all that fun stuff, I'm able to kind of do it more remotely. So yeah, so I'm still connected in the, North Carolina triangle area, but living in Kentucky now.
If you ever want to come back, I'm sure North Carolina misses you.
Oh my gosh, I do. I do want to come back so bad. And I'm going to hit all of you up to be like, can I crash on your couch? Like, why don't stay? So
I feel like anytime I have a guest that isn't in North Carolina, I'm like, you should come to North Carolina. You should come here. And my goal is to just rally as many people here as possible.
that'd be so awesome. I would love to have like a total meetup with like all the people that we know and like all our therapist friends. I think that'd be so fun. We should plan that.
Oh, definitely. We'll put that on the books. So what are some of the things that you specialize in?
Yes. So for me, I specialize in trauma and PTSD. That's kind of my big bread and butter for my practice. So it was kind of a long journey getting there, but I realized, for a lot of clients that I work with, because I did my internship in the prison system in North Carolina. So I worked at Central Prison downtown and also like the women's prison. And obviously working with that population, the trauma history and stories I heard, they're just heartbreaking. Like it's all the time that like kind of how people ended up, in like federal custody basically, or state custody. So that's kind of what sparked it, because I was at the beginning, of my career. Like you don't really know what you're doing when you're on internship. They kind of throw everything at you, like try all the things, see what you like, what don't you like. And that just really resonated with me. So then after I finished my internship, I went to a separate private practice in the community, and started kind of my specialty area there. So I just really enjoy working with trauma clients. I especially enjoy working with women who've dealt with like sexual abuse or assault. I find that work really meaningful and empowering and really powerful for me. But I treat kind of the gamut of trauma. So I've worked with people who have kind of like single incident things, like a really bad car accident, or maybe some type of like medical situation that was really scary for them, all the way to like chronic, complex, like childhood trauma. So kind of the whole spectrum really. I feel like the only thing I don't have a lot of experience in is religious trauma, because I didn't grow up really religious. I didn't have a lot of clients that kind of had that trauma when I was training. But other than that, I feel like most trauma I've seen or helped people with.
Yeah. Our field is always so interesting. I'm always curious as to like what draws people to their specialties, because it's intense work, and going in with it. Hey, I mean, it's like the question of like, when someone asks what you do on a plane and you're like, I'm a trauma specialist. And it's like, okay, well, like that, okay. Like how one responds to that when they're like, oh yeah, I work in accounting. Like, I work with numbers, but
on a plane, I usually don't. That's not what I lead with. That's then you're probably gotten the same thing of like, oh, like I specialize in couples and I'm a therapist. It's like, then they're like, oh, I have stuff to tell you. I'm like, well, I would like to relax on this flight.
Quick anecdote. I was at a show, like I was seeing, I think it was actually the Alanis Morissette music. He came out, the Jagged Little Pill one. And I sit down, there's a woman next to me who's there with her mom. She's probably in her 60s. And she says, oh, what do you do for work? And I said, I'm a therapist. And she unleashes all of these things that are going on with her daughter and her and their relationship. And I just sat there and went, okay. And the person I was with was like, does this happen to you all the time? Like, is this really how this goes? And I went, yeah. I have to start leading with I'm a consultant because I think that'll just deter people from asking me more questions.
Oh my gosh, you're just like, I'm just trying to listen to it. Like, please.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm really just trying to enjoy the show, which was also kind of interesting because it was like about like a mother-daughter relationship and addiction, all these other things.
Oh,
But
wow.
and so I'm looking at her and I'm like, wow, you must be feeling a lot of things right now. But
So
anyway,
the lyrics are resonating for sure.
yeah, everything's resonating with you right now, huh? Like, do you want to unpack that?
I do that for sure. Where like people will definitely ask you like, what do you do, or where are you traveling to? Why are you traveling? And I have definitely tried to filter, being like, oh well, I'm a psychologist. Like I have my own practice. Like oh, I'm in mental health. Like or just trying to get the keep it in general.
Yeah. I think psychologist also sounds, people might just say, will you diagnose me?
Yes.
So, well, what
It has me right now.
yeah.
For sure. I'm like, we're not like sidekicks. Like I can't just like read your aura, you know what I mean? And be like, oh, you have anxiety, you know?
People think that. I had someone ask me, so what am I thinking right now? And I was like, I'm not a psychic. That's not the same profession. I don't know what you think we do.
Totally agree for sure. And I don't know if you ever get confused with like psychiatrists, like medication management providers, but that's the next thing. It's like, oh, like, can you prescribe me some Xanax for this flight? I'm like, no, but I don't prescribe medication. Sorry. Like, so I think that gets confused too.
Wow, just have it on hand. Can you prescribe me Xanax? Sure, it's right in my bag. Yeah.
Your GP can give that to you too, but a little
Yeah.
side note. But
Right. Oh my gosh, that is so funny. So, trauma work, how did you get into it?
so yeah, so for me, it's an interesting story. This is a whole like side note tangent of my life, but I don't know if you came kind of in the same path or not, but when I was thinking about like undergrad or like kind of what I wanted to do with my life, at that age, I'm like, oh, like I really like helping people, but I wasn't sure kind of what avenue I wanted to go in. So I actually wanted to be, this is going to sound so weird, a pediatric dentist. I'm like, oh, well, like, kids are terrified of the dentist. I'm sure they have terrible experiences. Like, I want them to have a good experience. Like, I think people's like smile, is really important where they don't feel like insecure, all the things, right? So I did dental hygiene school literally for 1 semester. Couldn't hack it. I'm like, why did I ever think I could be in people's mouths? I could deal with blood. I could that is not the medical person that I am. So then I had a complete like meltdown of like, this is what I thought I wanted to do. And like, what? So, that kind of came about. Well, I guess. So basically I didn't go, like, I like stopped going after the semester and I was like, okay, like, what am I going to do? So I feel like kind of the trauma stuff was like under there of like, I want to have people have a good experience. Like, I don't want them to be afraid, like all that stuff. Not contribute to people's trauma, more of their trauma. So, I was like, well, what else can I do with this? So I was like, oh, maybe psychology. I really liked my classes. Like, I like how, kind of figuring out like why people do the things that they do or, how things impact them. So I did a little reflecting and I think mine comes from my mom had cancer when I was really little. I was like 3. She had breast cancer. And back then, because I didn't have as much, like treatment options as they do now, she had like stage 4. She was like pretty young. And she had to like go weekly for like chemo treatment. Like where we lived in Maine, she had to drive like multiple hours. So this was not like you just pop into the hospital and like come home. Like she would have to stay overnight, things like that. And I remember a lot of it because my mom didn't want me to be afraid. Like she didn't want me to feel like she like disappeared for periods of time. So they would like bring me and try to make it like less scary. And that she had that for like, I think like 14 months or 16 months, like of chemo and radiation treatment. And then it came back like years later. So we had kind of another occurrence of it. And I just remember like as a kid that being really hard for me because there wasn't a lot of people around that had the same experience that I did. And it brought up a lot because my mom and I are close. We're all a very close family. So like, I was the kid who like slept with my parents, but when I like have a nightmare or something, my mom's not there and she's getting, overnight chemo treatment. That was just a really, really hard time. So I was like, well, like maybe instead of doing dentistry that I'm not medically fit for, maybe I can kind of lean into the psychology realm. So I think there's like a personal path for me and then doing the internship with hearing people's stories and just like how much pain people carry and how much influence that has on people really resonated with me. And that's kind of where I got the trauma PTSD specialty. So long story short, that's how I ended up here.
No, because you started out with going in, this is a really hard experience for kids to go through, and I want to make it easier for them. And that totally makes sense as to how that value or that underlying reasoning for the original dentistry profession, but then having that be the core piece of it that translates into your profession now.
So I felt like I found like my space after a while. So that's a note to anybody of like, you don't have to decide immediately at 18 what you want to do. We all go on different paths. And I think even for, if you're thinking of being a therapist, um, I'm sure your experience is similar. Where it's like you start, you're like, oh, I really want to work with anxiety, or I really want to work with people, dealing with this. And then you get into it and you're like, same thing for me. I don't work with kids now. I love kids. I thought I wanted to be a pediatric dentist. I don't treat children now. I only treat adults. So I feel like, you can go a lot of different ways with different experiences that you have.
Mhm. That's a beautiful thing about this profession is that there are so many avenues to go down, where that's with your age demographic, the specialties you can go into. There's a lot of ways to be able to pivot.
For sure. Definitely. And I feel like also expand. So like even within kind of your specialty, there's always like new modalities, new trainings, new things to offer, new populations to work with. So I think that's really cool too about what we can do is like always, there's always kind of a growth there. So I feel like it doesn't get stagnant, which is nice.
Yeah, we're forever students of the
Yeah,
trade.
for our students, for sure.
Absolutely. Yeah. So, trauma and dating, how did this become more of your area of focus, and how do they intersect?
Yes. So when I have been working in private practice, and obviously I kind of come from the perspective of like treating people holistically. Like, so even though I do a lot of, which I'm like extensively trained in cognitive processing therapy. So that is definitely more of a manualized, like session by session, like these are the things you focus on kind of thing. It was coming up a lot because there's areas that get impacted that are kind of like the known five. So like self-esteem and self-worth, like trust, not only trust of other people, but trust of yourself, safety, security, power and control, like all of those areas. Um, I noticed that when I had clients that were not they were in the dating world, but maybe not in like serious committed relationships or marriages, not that it can't show up there too. They were having a really hard time, like more so than like the average of like dating is hard. You get really nervous. You're not kind of finding your person. It was much more than that. And I feel like there wasn't a lot of in-depth coverage with that treatment modality to say, hey, like, how is this showing up for you in everyday life besides just like more internal things or more cognitive things? So I had, for whatever reason on my caseload, I had a lot of clients in an age group that they were dating or trying to date and going on dating apps. And this kept coming up. And I'm like, okay, like, how am I going to address this? Like, what, like, this is a real problem. Like, what am I going to do? So I spent a lot of time going back to, which we'll talk about, like, attachment styles and that, because that's, I feel like intertwined very well with obviously trauma. Um, and I spent a lot of time talking to them about those things and also figuring out like practical ways that they can implement stuff, when they're actually dating or like preparing to date. And I found that really helpful because I think there was just like a gap there that was missing.
Yeah, there's so much here. Because what were you seeing with the clients who were in the dating space compared to other people?
Yeah. So a lot of it was much more either guardedness or nervousness before dating. So like more so than your average, just like, oh, I'm meeting a new person. Like I want to put my best foot forward, like the normal kind of anticipatory anxiety. It was like, what if, I have an emotional trigger? What if, I'm at the restaurant and there's something outside of my control and then like, I have to go to the bathroom or excuse myself, like all of these kind of trauma related responses that I think in real life, compared to when you're talking about it in a therapy setting or kind of in the privacy of your own home, it's like, what do I do if, this happens? And I feel so bad for people because like dating is hard in general. Like you're already a little bit nervous and anxious. You want to put your best foot forward. You feel like you're getting evaluated by somebody, which adds like a whole nother layer. And then people with a trauma history or even just like insecure attachment, issues, they have a whole nother complex layer of like working through those things while also being on a date or preparing for a date. that I felt was almost like unfair that they're getting like evaluated or judged. Whether this person doesn't know them super well. I'm sure you don't share like a ton of your history if you're talking for a couple weeks before going on a date. That it's like they're getting judged for something or like evaluated in like a negative way that is not really reflective of them. It's a trauma response or it's an emotional trigger, like whatever's going on at the time. So I thought it was just really helpful to be able to like talk to those, identify those, and like work through like practical tools and like tricks to use on the date.
So when you say that they were getting judged, was this an internal judgment? Was this an external judgment? I'm sure there's probably a
Yep,
mixed bag depending on the experience, but what were
sure.
some of the things that you were hearing?
Yeah, so definitely both. So I think there's always the internal judgment of like, why can't I control this? Like I've been in therapy for a long time. Like, why am I not over this already? This is still impacting me. And then I definitely think on the external realm of like, if somebody, I'm trying to think of a good example. Like if you're in the middle of a conversation at dinner and like maybe somebody is starting to like dissociate a little bit, um, or get really anxious and kind of like shuts down. And they're like, hello, like what, like, like, oh, lost you there for a minute. I think people can get unfairly judged for that, where it's like, oh, well, like, are you not interested? Or like, oh, that was kind of a weird interaction, which is not, that's truly not them or like reflective of them. That is just like something that's like occurring because of their trauma history or attachment style.
Sure. I think about the diagnosis of borderline personality disorder and how even unfair of a diagnosis that is, because the very first characteristic in the DSM is perceived or actual abandonment
Yes.
being part of their like history. And that shows up in some of these traits that in accordance to the DSM, which, whatever. It's like, it starts to then become more of I have an intense push pull with people. And I can imagine that in dating, that people who've had experiences around abandonment or trauma, especially in relationships with others and especially caregivers, that's going to show up in I want you close, but also don't know how to be close. And then I also feel like I need to push you away. And I also feel myself shutting down, or I feel myself maybe even getting more anxious and wanting to pull you closer. And it looks like lashing out.
Mhm. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's exactly the pattern for sure. And again, like very, people are getting kind of evaluated in that way when you're like, oh, is this going to be a person? Is this a good fit? And they're not understanding like that's not their personality. Like this is a trauma response. Like this is part of like, insecure attachment. Because yeah, I mean, if you think about it from the other person's perspective, like the potential partner, or like, person that you might be dating, I feel like that's like a red flag for like mixed signals, right? Where I'm like, well, is it really mixed signals or is it like we need to come at it from a more aware, compassionate, caring, supportive perspective. And that's where I think like just the general, like what is trauma informed dating? Like that's what it is like coming at relationships from that perspective of like having a lot of self-awareness. Just like think about like how do you connect with others? What are ways that you struggle? What are ways that maybe are more secure for you? And what comes up just so you can maybe, be able to communicate those things better, work through those things on your own better or through therapy. Just because I think people are going to hit a wall every time if that isn't like addressed. And we can't move closer to like secure attachment or like healing some of those trauma wounds.
So essentially, trauma informed dating. It's about going inwards,
Mhm.
gaining awareness about oneself and how that is showing up in the romantic relationship realm. Because I think that often, I mean, granted, it could be shown in other relationship realms, but I think about the romantic relationship realms as it being the things that most closely mirror our relationships with our caregivers, because it's someone that we are building a life story with potentially. And in dating, it's not just a do I like you? It's do I want to potentially share taxes, a house, maybe children with you. So there's a lot more at stake when it comes to romantic partnerships as opposed to other relationships.
Absolutely, for sure. Yeah, and that's a very vulnerable place to be of like, and again, kind of thinking about dating, like past experiences I've had, I'm sure experiences that you've had. Like, I think people get so in their head of like, am I doing a good job talking? Like, am I like showing up in my best way? Do I look okay? Like, do all of our like performance like inward, where I think with especially trauma informed dating, you need to like know yourself, and like do that type of work. But I think we skip the step of like evaluating the other person because you're exactly right. If you feel uncomfortable, if you don't feel supported, if you feel like you're not really being listened to or heard, they don't remember stuff that you've talked about texting 2 weeks ago or whatever, and you do have a trauma history, especially, I don't think that already sounds like a good fit, right? Like you need to have somebody that you can be yourself and vulnerable with and say, "Hey, like I don't have to give you every single detail, but like these are the things that I've experienced and like these are the impacts for me." So then therefore, I need a partner that communicates really well. Like that's a big one that I hear, and I'm sure you hear that in couples therapy too. Like I feel like communication is like almost number one. Where if you have somebody, if you're meeting for a date, say that you're there, earlier on time, you're waiting at the bar, waiting for them to come to the restaurant, and you're supposed to be meeting at 7 and it's 7:20 and you haven't heard anything. Well, what is that going to, and you have a trauma history or you have anxious attachment or, whatever's going on. How does that impact you? Like, is that okay? Like I think a lot of the time, unfortunately, if some of those wounds you're not aware of, or they're not like you're not in therapy to kind of work on those, that can get disregarded very quickly. So you can have somebody that kind of leans one way and says, "Oh my gosh, like this is ridiculous. I'm not putting up with this." Bye. And like there's no grace and no communication. I'm kind of in that avoidant way. Or you could lean more anxious and then you're chronically texting or like, "Oh my gosh, did I get the time wrong?" Or whatever. So like you're already dysregulated before anyone even shows up. So I feel like
Mhm.
that's not a good experience. And also, this kind of goes into something else, but like with boundary setting, that I think is very important for trauma informed dating and like kind of non negotiables. Um, are you putting up with stuff that you shouldn't? Where it's like, okay, if I don't hear from you for 20 minutes, like that's not okay. I wouldn't do that at an appointment. I wouldn't do that with a friend. Why am I doing that with somebody I just met that I'm going on my first date with?
So to give this, because I like this example of it, you go to show up for a date, you haven't heard from someone, and it's maybe been 15, 20 minutes past the time you're supposed to meet. And when someone has a response, like what would a trauma response, like if it's, let's say, a quote unquote regulated response versus a response that is dysregulated and maybe stems from trauma, what would the differentiating factors between those two be?
Sure. Yeah. And so I think for someone that is more secure, maybe doesn't have like as much of a trauma history, I think it would be they wouldn't feel super dysregulated. You would probably come from a place instead of like black and white thinking, or instant like negative thinking to, okay, this person is like a little bit late. Maybe they hit traffic. Maybe they're trying to find a parking spot. Maybe, there's a thousand different scenarios, right? So I think as a person that had a little more secure attachment would probably communicate, right? Like that would be your next step to say like, "Oh, hey, like I'm at the bar, like were we supposed to meet at 7 question mark?" Right? And like you wait for that response and you kind of expect that person to respond at some point. Where I feel like someone who's more anxious, that could be look like a rapid text response, right? Like, and then like going outside the restaurant to see if they see that, like it's more erratic kind of in that way. And then I think an avoidant attachment person would probably like shut down, right? They would be like, "Okay, like this is why I don't date. Like I'm done putting up breaks." So it jumps like the other end of the spectrum. And then they would probably leave the restaurant with no communication, no grace, no like wiggle room, gray area.
Mhm.
There could be other possibilities instead of like, "Oh, I'm rejected," or "I feel abandoned," in that moment.
So it's doom and gloom. One might be I'm rejected or I'm abandoned, and the other one is this is why dating sucks and it's never going to work for me. I'm going to be alone forever.
Exactly. Yeah. So then you might
Okay.
not be motivated or continue over just one experience that could simply be that person is like driving around the parking garage and can't find something because you went to a really popular restaurant. Granted, do I think that person should have communicated? Yes. But I think if you're secure within yourself and like know that maybe the communication is important to you, then that's something that you would address, right? Like you would say in a nice way, you don't have to be mean, but like, "Oh, hey, like, next time, if you want to bring it up on the date or whatever, like next time, do you mind if you're running late to like shoot me a text?" Because I
Yeah.
think that should be a boundary, right? Like that is something you need in a potential partner.
Right. Yeah. I like that you're saying being secure in oneself because it really is a bit of an and both when it comes to relational realms of how secure can I feel in myself? And as you mentioned before, which that I think the 5 pillars, which I definitely want to go over again, but one of them, it sounds like being self-esteem, self-worth.
Yep.
And often I think about when I'm working with people who are in the dating spaces, it becomes a direct reflection of self-esteem. Their dating choices, the standards for dating, it becomes a direct reflection of how they see themselves and what they think or what self-worth might mean. Now, I have people who are like, I know I'm worthy and I know these things, but that there's something there's a cognitive dissonance. I know this, yet I'm choosing people who aren't aligning with where I want to be in life, with how I want to be treated, with how my values are. And so I'm just kind of settling for but this is what's here and this is what's available to me.
Yes, exactly, for sure. Yeah, and I completely agree with you that I think self-esteem, we actually really careful with that because I don't believe in the saying of like, you need to love yourself before you can love someone else. Like, I think that's way too black and white, way too general. But I think the foundation of it is helpful because you can still be working on things and healing things and like working on your self-awareness and still be dating. Like, I don't think you have to feel like a self-actualized person to like be in a relationship or like go on a date. Um, but if you have zero awareness, that is where I feel like the consequence or like sacrifices is like your self-esteem and self-worth. Because if you kind of keep repeating patterns like this, our brains, the way that kind of trauma works, and I think of like bad kind of dating experiences as like a form of trauma, like right, like chronic things that your brain wants to make sense of it. It's like, this is awful. I don't want this to happen anymore. So, like, what is going on to cause this? And typically, just because of how our brains are wired, it is always going to be internal. It's always going to be you. It's not going to be external because of hindsight bias, because of, maladaptive thoughts like self-blame and guilt and shame. So it's like, well, I didn't text enough, or I wasn't interesting enough, or I'm not attractive enough. It's always typically going to be an I focused way. Um, where that's a lot to play around with. If you go on 3, 4, 7 dates and that's kind of what's happening, and it's eating away at your self-esteem and self-worth. You're probably never going to put yourself out there again, or very, rarely. And two, we're not changing the patterns of like the people that you're selecting or allowing to kind of have access to you. Because then the more kind of degraded your self-esteem and self-worth is, the less like good potential partners you're going to be choosing. Because like you said, you're going to settle and settle even more and more and more, where then you're going to have no boundaries.
Right. Yeah. The slogan of "you have to love yourself first," it drives me crazy because I think about self-care, self-esteem, self-worth, self-love, and it's like, yes, however, and I've said it a couple of times, and it's such a crass way of saying this, but I'm like, do you wanna masturbate or do you wanna make love? Like, you can do all the masturbatory practices and look, there is a place for that, absolutely. Like, please work on yourself, do the journaling, go to therapy, do the individual parts of this. On the flip side, to say that it's a one-to-one isn't it's not transferable. It's not an equation because once we get into the relational spaces, it's going to bring up a whole different side of us. It brings up a lot more complexities because there's another person highlighting something inside of you or inside of us.
Totally agree. Yeah, and I think that's also like a good point to kind of add to like the definition of trauma informed dating, because it is about you and like your awareness and like how are you, showing up in a caring, compassionate, boundaried, grounded, way, but also the partner or potential partner as well. Like, and I think this is probably a whole nother podcast episode, but like the intersectionality of each person's attachment style plays into that, right? So like hopefully you maybe like you or the partner is secure. Like that's ideal, is either having two secure people or having at least one secure partner. Maybe if someone is a little more anxious or a little more avoidant leaning. I feel like though that can still be healthy. That can still be worked on, but someone that's like avoidant and anxious, the classic, as you know, from your treatment, like that is very difficult to work with, because you're having like both people are having to like work on themselves, be aware, how does that